The ANC First Deputy Secretary General Nomvula Mokonyane has slammed the DA, saying it remains her party's guest in the government of national unity. This after the DA Federal Executive Chairperson Helen Zille said her party was not in the government of national unity, but a coalition with other parties, including the ANC. The South African Democratic Teachers Union says it is shocked that the Pretoria High School for girls learners have been exonerated. The Electoral Commission celebrates a clean audit for 4 consecutive years. And a very good afternoon to you. It has just gone 12 noon Central African time. This is the Week in Review right here on SABC News Channel 404. We are coming to you live from our Auckland Park studios in Johannesburg, and we are ready to review some of the week's biggest stories. I am Sebenzile Nkambule. We invite you to join in the conversation. You can give us a ring on our studio line. The number is 011-714-0680, 0681 or 0682. Welcome. We start here this afternoon. The ANC has lashed out at the Democratic Alliance for its comments on the government of national unity. ANC Deputy Secretary General Nomvula Mokonyane says the party can't afford to be as reckless as DA Federal Chairperson Helen Zille. Mokonyane's comments come after Zille described the GNU as a coalition between the ANC and the DA.
The ANC and the Democratic Alliance are not seeing eye to eye on the characterization of the government of national unity. DA Federal Chairperson Helen Zille sees it as a coalition between the ANC and the DA, but Lutuli House has a different view. ANC Deputy Secretary General Nomvula Mokonyane says the party can't afford to act like Zille.
We as the ANC are duty bound to nurture this. We can't be as reckless as Mrs. Zille. We can't be reckless because it is us who invited people. She was a guest and she remains a guest of the ANC. And if she has any discomfort, she is bound to actually express it, and it is within her right, but not to undermine the collective that is represented in Parliament. Majority of political parties that are represented in Parliament.
Turning to discussions on the election results, Mokonyane says they will not embark on a witch hunt against provincial and regional leaders who failed at the polls. Speculation has been rife that the party would disband the Gauteng province, KwaZulu-Natal and Northern Cape structures.
Any repercussions on who are not even near discussions of Utikshaywaban. Where we are now is what happened, and once we have that understanding, we then go out and engage with everybody, self-correct where there has to be self-correction, strengthen, but ensure that you do not first start by saying Mabahambe. We're not a Mabahambe party. What we are here about is about regaining what Mdua said. It's the first time we have this. How do we reposition ourselves, but also what kind of different messages we're taking to different communities, because the voter is not just excited about 1912. The voter in each and every corner has got his or her own different issues that he or she is interested in.
The African National Congress, in its second day of the National Executive Committee, delves deeper into the issues why the ANC dropped electorally. Some of the factors remain of the Jacob Zuma factor in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, poor service delivery in many municipalities, and that voters did not trust the ANC in the interventions it made on electricity and also power cuts in areas such as Soweto. Samkeila Masego, SABC News, Boksburg.
Meanwhile, the ANC interim spokesperson Zuko Godlimpi says the party must be given space in which to deliberate on the matter of Johannesburg Mayor Kabelo Kwamanda. Godlimpi's statement comes after Mashaba's interview with SABC News yesterday. Mashaba has accused the ANC of dragging its feet over Kwamanda's removal. Godlimpi was speaking in Boksburg, east of Johannesburg, where the ANC's National Executive Committee meeting is underway. For the latest on the ANC NEC meeting, we're joined live by SABC News reporter Natasha Piri, who is at the Birchwood Hotel. Afternoon to you, Natasha. A recap of Godlimpi's briefing earlier, and particularly on the question of Johannesburg Mayor Kwamanda.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Sebenzile. And of course, to our SABC viewers, indeed, you would remember that yesterday, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba was actually at the SABC studios in Auckland Park, and he had said, somewhat accusing the ANC of dragging its feet of removing the Johannesburg mayor, Kabelo Kwamanda. Remember, Action SA that had said that it's willing to work with the ANC, not necessarily form a coalition government, but of course, there needs to be certain conditions that both parties must agree to. One of those conditions is the removal of the 200 fee surcharge, electricity fee surcharge, and that Action SA actually receives speaker positions in Johannesburg and in Tshwane. They didn't say who their preferred candidate would be from the ANC to actually replace, Kabelo Kwamanda, but they had said that it needs to be an ethical person who will prioritize the needs of delivering services to the people of Johannesburg. But if you will recall the interview that my colleague Samgelo Masego actually had with the provincial secretary of the ANC in the province of Johannesburg, Mr. TK Nziza, he had said that there was an agreement that Kabelo Kwamanda would actually be the caretaker mayor of the city of Johannesburg. We all know by now that the ANC's chairperson in the region of Johannesburg and the current MMC of Finance, Mr. Dada Morero, is actually punted to take over as the city of Johannesburg's mayor. Remember, he served a stint or so as the mayor about for 30 days, Sebenzile. So those are just the current talks that are actually happening. We heard there Mr. Mashaba saying that he had hoped that he would have a meeting with Mr. Nziza and the chairperson of the ANC in the province, Banyaza Lesufi, on Thursday. But because of this current ANC NEC that's taking place, he hopes that the meeting will actually take place, on Sunday, which is tomorrow. And of course, you've heard the ANC's interim spokesperson there, Zuko Godlimpi's comments asking for space and asking that the ANC be actually given time to actually talk about this issue. But on issues of today, Sebenzile, the third and last day of the ANC NEC meeting, remember there will be a Lekgotla taking place from tomorrow and will conclude on Tuesday, where we also expect ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa to give a closing address and just sum up what has been happening over the past 6 days. Today, the talks that are actually dominating are the issues of the national dialogue. And we have seen the former president of the ANC, Mr. Thabo Mbeki, actually coming in. He's currently giving his presentations. And you would remember that before the elections, we heard the former President Mbeki asking for this national dialogue. And so far, we've seen various civil society groups and formations holding, dialogues on this very national dialogue, or conversations on this very national dialogue. And what we were told by Mr. Godlimpi there is that they're actually discussing, and former President Thabo Mbeki is actually discussing the approach to the national dialogue, the modalities. When we asked when they think the national dialogue would actually take place, he had said that it's somewhat an indication of this year, and it's the prerogative of the president to actually set the date of the national dialogue. He also said that this national dialogue would somewhat mirror those talks of what actually happened around the Freedom Charter. And of course, it is expected that this national dialogue will consolidate the GNU, or talks around the GNU. So this is just what actually came out of today. We do expect a media briefing at 1:30 by ANC NEC members Phoebe Podreta, I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce his surname, as well as David Makura, that will be briefing members of the media around the party's policy positions and those talks that they're actually having behind closed doors. Sebenzile.
Natasha, yesterday we also heard Mokonyane saying that the party has learned from its mistakes, and during this ANC NEC meeting will be delving into some of the causes for the massive decline in the elections, even though they landed just over 40% of the total vote. Do we have a sense really of the nature of these deliberations? It's also coming at a time where they also unpacking dynamics within the GNU with comments from Helen Zille as well, seemingly irritating the DSG at this time as well. Have these deliberations been rather intense as they delve into what might have gone wrong?
Well, in terms of what might have gone wrong, you're quite right, Sebenzile. We heard that Deputy Secretary General Ms. Nomvula Mokonyane actually addressing this issue yesterday, also citing the fact that the MK party also dealt a blow, not only for the ANC, Sebenzile, but across every other political party. It was something that was actually unexpected, as the ANC had actually taken stock of why their performance had actually dropped thus far. Remember, like you've correctly cited, the ANC's electoral support in 2019 has dropped from 57.5% to 40% in this year's elections. They also lost their outright majority in provinces like Gauteng, where they got about 35% if you'd round it up, and KZN 17% if you would round it up. But she also said that there will be no punishment in some of these provinces where the ANC actually did or declined, I beg your pardon. She had said that, in her own words, the ANC has learned the hard way. The intentions of wanting to deal with people based on the outcomes of the elections has never helped the ANC, but has actually made the ANC become much more weaker. So as far as the ANC NEC is concerned, the ANC will be reconstituting its election structures, specifically in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. And of course, the ANC, the hope for the ANC is that it will emerge with a concrete recovery plan in terms of the provinces where it actually lost its outright majority, but not only that, at a national level. When coming to Helen Zille, you played a package that was compiled by my colleague Samgele Masego, and of course they've labelled the DA's federal chairperson's comments, Helen Zille, as being reckless, Sebenzile. It was quite also interesting to hear, just briefly though, on the sidelines of the ANC NEC, we managed to have take a video clip of the ANC national chairperson, Mr. Gwede Mantashe, and of course he had actually cited that Helen Zille has her own objectives of actually, making those comments, that of course it isn't a government of national unity, but instead is a coalition between the DA and the ANC. So these are just some of the things that actually came out in the past 2 days. Sebenzile.
Natasha Piri, who is live from the Birchwood Hotel, thank you very much for your time. We're expecting another briefing later on this afternoon as we hear more that comes from that ANC NEC meeting. Thank you very much to Natasha. We move on to this now. The Electoral Commission is celebrating a clean audit for 4 consecutive years. The Auditor General has completed the external audit procedures for the 2023-24 financial year and awarded the IEC a clean audit opinion. The Commission has committed to continue upholding its sterling fiscal and governance standards going forward. In a media statement, IEC CEO Sly Mamabolo has lauded the organization for successfully implementing internal controls and says they will strive to uphold the standard in coming years. Mamabolo says besides focusing on delivering reputable elections, the organization has prioritized professional business practices. The audit report, together with the annual report, will now be presented to the National Assembly. The South African Democratic Teachers Union says it is shocked that learners from the Pretoria High School for girls have been exonerated. The 12 suspended learners were found not guilty of misconduct following disciplinary hearings conducted by a panel of the school governing body. A 3-member panel convened the disciplinary hearing. The learners faced disciplinary hearings after they were implicated in controversial WhatsApp group conversations that they were allegedly filled with racial comments and complaints about black pupils. This led to the school principal, Philippa Erasmus's suspension for a period of 3 months, pending investigations into the matter. She allegedly turned a blind eye when a learner who was victimized exposed the WhatsApp group. 8 of the 12 girls were stripped of their prefect positions after their suspension. The controversy has drawn mixed reactions and much political attention. It has since emerged that all 12 learners have been exonerated and reinstated as prefects. Thank you for staying with us. To this now, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime says 95 Libyan nationals arrested at a supposed security training facility in Mpumalanga were allegedly sent for military training. It says they are members of the notorious 2020 company, which falls under the Eastern Libyan militia controlled by Khalifa Haftar. Police Minister Senzo Mchunu says the Libyan nationals were arrested at a facility which operated more like a military training camp than an ordinary security training center. To help us dissect these developments, we're joined by conflict security expert Dr. Kingsley Makubela. Dr. Makubela, thank you for your time with us this afternoon. It's useful perhaps to start by contextualizing who the Libyan Arab Armed Forces and Khalifa Haftar are.
Sabenzile, thank you very much. General Khalifa actually is a strong man that emerged after the collapse of Muammar Gaddafi. He controlled the eastern part of Libya. At one stage, he was making tremendous approaches to Tripoli, to take over Tripoli, and he was stopped on the verge of that. So Libya has since been divided into a militia state, if you want to call it. One control in Tripoli, one control by Khalifa in the east. So that's essentially where it is. The 2020 company is a military formation. It consists of between 100 and 250 men. Usually in a conventional army, it will go to up to 250, but in small guerrilla unit or militia unit, you find it there are close to 100 men in arms that consist of a company.
We understand that the grouping as well that we're talking about here, the 95 Libyans who were found at this Militaires Day Academy near White River were part of this 2020 company. Help us understand what the relationship is between ourselves, because we also understand what reports are telling us here was that South Africans were meant to go to Eastern Libya to provide this training. Then you have this 95 landing here. Where does South Africa enter, and what perhaps might be the consequences of our involvement in the training of this militia group?
Precisely, Serenzile. The issue is, what are the implications of the story going globally and really telling the world that South Africa is training militia groups that are intent on continuing to stabilizing Libya? So that information is quite dire for the country, has serious repercussion for the country, has serious consequences in terms of the confidence and trust in the country. Anyone who is manning our border should have been alarmed to see a group of 95 men moving in to say they're going to school or they're going to any form of training. And any person should have understood that people coming from a war-torn area like Libya, it raises alarm. And there should have been action from the beginning. The question that we're all asking ourselves with this information, this limited information that is coming up, Sebenzile, is what happened to our security establishment to understand and detect this and prevent this before it causes such an embarrassment to the country. Because if so many people were trained within our borders and no one knew about this and they continue with the training, and we don't know where they were going to be sent after this, what would happen to the security of the state? Those are the questions that all of us are asking ourselves, and rightfully so.
At this point, Dr. Makubela, are we clear that there was in fact no intelligence on the operations of this particular camp, who the individuals were, how they got in. You understand that it was misrepresenting themselves in Tunisia. This is how they then get documents to land up in South Africa. But are we any wiser as to the intelligence, whether it was existent or not, about the operations of this camp in White River?
My understanding, Sebenzile, if there was intelligence, it should have prevented this kind of training. We shouldn't be where we are because the intelligence, it's meant to forewarn and to take action before anything that has a serious implication for the reputation of the Republic happens. If intelligence was there and let this happen, it has serious damage for the reputation of the country. And my understanding and knowing some of the people who work in our security services and how dedicated they are, they wouldn't have allowed this thing to happen, understanding the implication on the reputation of the Republic. So it tells you there was none. You look at the statement of the minister. The minister, Mkhunu, says, this looks like a military training. And yet the commissioner of police says we're under investigation, so he doesn't know. So those are some of the problems that we need to manage, systemic problems, Sebenzile, that politicians must not get involved in operational matter. This is an operational matter. This should have been a sterile area for the police to conduct their thorough investigation before any pronouncement is made about the nature of the training. If indeed it was the training, are this private security company regulated to check the content of the training? And more so, how would they allow private security company to train people from a war-torn area? I don't think the country would have done that. Understanding South Africa, unless I'm lost with the South Africa that I grew under and that I spent most of my time serving, I really don't know.
Looking at what is happening in Libya currently, the mandate of the UN-backed government in Tripoli has expired and the Eastern government is calling it illegitimate. What might these developments of the so-called militia training here mean in terms of inflaming tensions and the regional security at large? Absolutely.
I mean, the mandate of the government in Tripoli, it expired. And that's why General Khalifa is questioning the authority of that government. But that put aside, Sebenzile, is the whole question of the fact that there are militias that have already taken the state in Libya, and they would continue to have an incentive, actually, not to constitute the state, because they benefit from, the state of war accruement that comes up with the sale of oil, whatever they do, without paying any taxes. So basically, the state is being decimated, and few individuals are really getting richer, and militias are starting to be out of control, and they're controlled by different bands. And of course, ethnicity comes into play. And looking at Libya and the whole challenge in the Sahel area and the neighboring countries, anyone should have been sensitive to ensure that there's no form of training of people coming from war-torn area to continue to destabilize not only Libya, but to destabilize the whole Sahel area.
The 95 Libyan nationals made their first appearance in the White River Magistrates Court on a charge of misrepresentation in an application for visas. The conversation around South Africa's porous borders remains an issue. What perhaps can be learned from here? What sort of measures should be taken that yet again this is another case of people who should not have been here, making their way in the country and getting comfortable really until being exposed in this nature. So many people are asking, it's 95 people now, how many more are here doing as they will in this country without authorities knowing that they are here?
Sebenzile, what would be very interesting is to look at the outcome of the report if it would made public. And my only fear is that I hope that the left hand in this case was not talking to the right hand. That the immigration may have picked up some suspicion but never communicated this, excuse me, to appropriate authorities so that appropriate action could be taken before it even happens. The fact that it has happened, it has occupied international media, comments around the world about this thing. It has seriously tainted and damaged the reputation of the country. It has raised a serious question of security for South Africans too. If such a large unit of military can be trained within our neighborhood, what else can happen? What are they going to do? Do we understand what kind of armaments were used in the training? And so those are a lot of questions that are still pending. And I hope once the investigation is done, they will reveal exactly what's going on. And appropriate action will be taken about the company that was involved in the training. Did they disclose to authorities what happened to the checks and balances to verify the private security company that what they are doing is what they've been mandated to do? So there are systemic failures that need to be really revisited by the state to ensure that this does not happen again, because it has serious consequences for the reputation of the Republic.
Finally, Dr. Makhubela, we've heard, of course, from the Minister of Police, Minister Senzo Mkhunu, about what they understand of this issue. We've heard a bit from the Department of Home Affairs as well, trying to understand how it is that they arrived in the country. Who else should we be hearing from to try and understand what's happening here? Is it DIRCO, perhaps? Might it be the SANDF, perhaps, that we also need to hear from to understand how they understand how all of this is playing out?
The intelligence ought to tell us, did they know anything about this group coming from a war-torn area? Probably these are same young men that anyone can see, can suspect there's something wrong coming from Libya. Did they know about it? Were appropriate authorities informed? So I think the bigger problem that we need to deal with as a country is to separate operational matters from politicians.
Yeah.
I mean, to really start conveying operational things to politicians, I don't think it's appropriate. I think professionals in the security classes should be given the space to do their investigation and make their determination. And once they have done that, they can give a conclusive report to politicians with clear recommendation of actions that need to be taken.
Let's park it there this afternoon. Thank you very much, Dr. Kingsley Makhubela, who is a conflict security expert. Thank you for your time, Doctor. Let's move on to this now. Police must be given space to fight crime. That's the call from KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner, Lieutenant General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi. It's directed at what he calls crime experts who have criticized the recent killings of suspects in that province.
The bloody war between the police and criminals in KwaZulu-Natal continues unabated. Today, 3 alleged hijackers were killed in Umlazi. Police say they hijacked a vehicle in the township and fired at the police who were giving chase. The police top brass in the province is concerned about the spike in conduct crimes. They've called a crime prevention summit to look for solutions. Community policing forums are also worried that they are now being targeted.
We are saddened and worried about the attacks against the CPF members, especially in the areas of Inanda and other areas where we feel they are being targeted and attacked, killed, and somewhere also put into a space of fear.
Government says the rampant crime is stalling economic growth.
I think what is happening between the criminals and the police are also not safe, because criminals, they are quite very aggressive, and there is no way police that they can in fact not protect themselves when the criminals are actually shooting at them. That's a very unfortunate part, which we are calling the people of KwaZulu-Natal to really not do that. That's the wrong route to attack the police. It's important that we all work together to rebuild and reconstruct the province in a peaceful way.
This aggressive approach has come under fire from some quarters, but police chiefs want to be left alone to do their work.
So we are dealing with serious things. It's not criminals that steal, it's criminals that kill. So we are in war. So when we take the war to the criminals as the police, the expert must give us space, because we are taking a war to the criminal. This is a battleground. We are fighting, we are not negotiating. The figures are on the ground, and we can see on the screen that have been presented. We are the leading province on murders. In 2014-2015 financial year, out of a total of 17,000 murder cases that were recorded, KZN accounted for 3,800.
17 suspected criminals have been killed within 2 weeks in shootout with police in separate incidents in the province. Meanwhile, police say crimes on the increase include gender-based violence, rape, and murder linked to taxi conflicts. Londi Khatebe, SABC News, Durban.
To this now, City Power spokesperson Isaac Mangena says they have spent over 3 million rand in 2 months replacing many substations that have blown up as a result of overloading in Alexandra, north of Johannesburg. City Power cut off illegal electricity connections at an informal settlement on London Road yesterday. Mangena says the illegal connections result in continuous power outages in the township. SABC News senior reporter Criselda Lewis reports.
Tons and tons of these cables that are being piled onto one specific area, and it makes it incredibly difficult for the system to be able to withstand some of the pressure that is being put on this. So what you can see here behind me is certainly multiple officials here from City Power trying to ensure that these cables here are disconnected. So if you just take a look, you can tell that this has been done over a long period of time. I mean, this is a lot of cabling, a lot of investment that has gone into ensuring that they're able to connect electricity, and City Power, of course, indicating that as much as they try to disconnect these cables, oftentimes it just takes a couple of hours. They're back again. While all of this takes place, I mean, there are multiple areas around here, and with it being one of its hot spots, they are going to try and see if they're not able to deal with some of the challenges that they are facing. We're going to try and get over this particular part. If I could have one gentleman try to help me here, and let's see if we can. I better not fall. All right, thank you. Oh. If we move towards this particular area, from right where we were, and we move towards here, Masabata will show you in just about a second. We'll move with it, give you a sense of what's taking place. Yes, these are young children that are walking right where these cables are, and it's a bit damp, it's wet here, making it extra dangerous for some of these illegal operations that are taking place here. There are children who would walk through here. Some of them die, some of them get choked. That's part of what we're hearing. Take a look at the stream. This stream is running right here to where that electricity cable is being pulled to. She says the situation is extremely dangerous. Some people have died due to the illegally connected electricity. She wants City Power to intervene.
Government,
this lady complains that they voted and now City Power is coming to take away their electricity. She says they are cold. She says it's their votes that are now in Parliament and all they want is electricity. She says in Greenville there is nothing. City Power's operation, which started this morning in Alexandra Township here in Johannesburg, has come to an end. But what you can see here next to me is a truck which is filled with these illegal connections that they managed to dismantle from several areas around Alexandra. What we do know is that over the past 2 months, City Power spent in the region of about 300 million rand trying to fix some of the substations that have blown up as a result of overloading.
So about a year ago, we used to basically have only 4% of the residents of Alexandra paying for electricity, but we have embarked on an operation or campaign to ensure that we install meters in most of the area so that people can start buying electricity, and we are seeing now only 11% of the residents of Alexandra buy electricity, and that is not enough to basically offset some of the losses that we are making here. The theft of electricity, as is done by this informal settlement and many others, is very serious, and it costs us a lot of money in terms of the infrastructure that blows up. On the other side, like I said, we've had to replace about 5 mini substations in the past 2 months. This is like 700,000 each, those mini substations. stations. And as such, those are some of the things that are really pushing us to ensure that we get these people to start buying electricity and to ensure that at least they do what is right and contribute to the revenue.
Isaac, thank you very much indeed. We do appreciate your time. If you just take a look at, you see residents here, City Power officials asking these residents to please just tone it down a bit. You can tell that they're a bit upset by what is taking place here as they pull these cables. Police also being brought in there, just right next to me to ensure. Just take a look right up there, Masabata. That's where that entire pole is being pulled from.
This now, the African National Congress has officially cut ties with former President Jacob Zuma. This after the party's National Disciplinary Committee resolved to expel him from the party following a disciplinary hearing held on the 23rd of July in his absence. The ANC's Disciplinary Committee found Zuma guilty of prejudicing the integrity of the party by joining Umkhonto weSizwe. Elected South African president in 2009, Zuma was forced from office in 2018 under the cloud of corruption allegations and was replaced by the incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa. To talk more about this, we're joined on the line by political analyst Dr. M.K. Zwagala. Dr. Zwagala, thank you for your time with us this afternoon on the Week in Review. The Disciplinary Committee of South Africa's ruling ANC has decided to expel former President Jacob Zuma for leading the MK party. No surprises there. The likes of the MKMVA, in fact, had wanted this decision to be taken a very long time ago. What are your thoughts about the latest developments this week?
Yeah, good afternoon to yourself and your viewers. This was an inevitable decision. I see that the ANC had postponed this to post-elections. I think there's a whole lot of review that the ANC needs to do. I know, for instance, they take the deployees through what they call through the eye of the needle to determine whether are they deployees, especially to government office, are they fit for purpose. So this goes back a couple of decades ago. I think a costly mistake was made in Polokwane 2007. Essentially, this is a president that administered state capture over years. So there's no surprise in the consistency of how the former president has been a liability to the ANC. And I think the previous election was a confirmation of how a liability the President Zuma was to the ANC. And it came back to bite. So there's a lot of self-reflection that the ANC has to do in terms of the type of a cadre that they are attracting, and most importantly, the type of people that they entrust with government.
Zuma has the right to appeal the disciplinary committee's decision. He has 21 days since, of course, him being dismissed to appeal this particular decision. Do you think that he will do so? It's a very confusing time for many here, because he is leading one party that's represented in Parliament, in a number of legislatures as well. He's leading another movement, yet there's still question marks as to whether or not he will appeal a decision expelling him from another party.
Yeah, I think anything now for the MK party and for Jacob Zuma, anything that will give them platforms through media, mainstream or digital media, he will certainly appeal the decision. Because what they claim now is they are still the original members of ANC, and the so-called they're not part of the so-called ANC of Ramaphosa. He will certainly appeal the decision, because anything that is covered in media around him as a persona, around his party, the MK party, anything that seeks to destabilize the ANC. You remember that he requested a hearing, an in-person hearing in Luthuli, and as we understood it, there'll then be a staged contest between the MK party and the ANC at Luthuli House. he thereafter requested this thing be live streamed. He'll certainly appeal just to distract and destabilize the ANC even further.
The ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula described his conduct as being irreconcilable with the spirit of the organization, discipline in the letter of the ANC constitution. To your earlier point now about how, in fact, the problem of Zuma, if you will, a former leader of that organization, perhaps started many years ago. We would have heard leading up to the elections as well, some wanting to frame the former president as somebody who had just gone rogue, of course not perhaps adequately confronting and dealing with the issue that he had enormous support within the party for such a long time, and that they contributed to the enormous headache that he would later become for the organization, and contributing, of course, significantly to the electoral decline in the most recent general election.
Certainly, I think the Secretary General of the ANC has a point. I don't think there's anything that can be reconciled post the 2024 elections. The MK party directly took away votes from the ANC. Will the ANC ever come back to hegemony? I doubt, highly doubt, I don't know. So it's certainly irreconcilable. To my point again, I think it's mind-boggling that that he had the support essentially of the ANC over a 9-10-year period, and no one saw this coming. As far as I'm concerned, the former president has always been a liability to the ANC, and he continues to be causing headache at the ANC. Let's not be oblivious of the fact that he does have a following, particularly in his province. The MK party numbers confirm that position, right? But we also need to move beyond issues of galvanizing support around issues of tribe, race, or religion, whatever the fact is. I mean, if we were to tend to that as a society, we would certainly regress, particularly considering our history of racial, tribal divisions. So it certainly does have a following, but ways is following it certainly in KwaZulu-Natal, his tribe.
Do you think that the party is adequately perhaps grappling with some of these questions, right, about the caliber of person that can actually rise to the #1 seat and lead the party, not once but twice, even though they don't finish the second term, but still, also be able to draw people away from the party when he breaks away and establishes something else, where he's also even able to lay claim to the MK, to the ideas and the ideals of the party, even while remaining right within the party, starting something else as well. Are they deeply engaging with what would have gone wrong here? Would have heard a couple of days ago the interim acting spokesperson of the party, Zuko Kodlimpi, saying that they need to unpack what it means when they say an individual is an ANC member in good standing. What does that actually mean? Is it just about the membership full stop, or should they begin to look more deeply and assess more deeply the caliber of person who should be a mere branch member, right up to who is actually eligible and able to take over the reins of the organization and lead it?
Yeah, so it's certainly a critical question that the ANC needs to address, the type of member that they're attracting. But most importantly, you remember now, there was a leadership vacuum when Jacob Zuma assumed office. For whatever reason, the organization was tired of President Thabo Mbeki. So there was essentially there was a vacuum. This now begs the question of the effectiveness of what they call the second layer leadership. They've got youth structures, they've got alliance partners, but at any point, an organization as big as the ANC, you should be having 2 to 3, 4, 5 people that are equally capable of being a president, for that matter. So I think it's a critical question that they must ask. For instance, now, what's the succession plan? Post Ramaphosa, what is that to happen? We've seen recently now with David Mabuza was understood to be the next president. He's not even in the in the national leadership at the moment. So I think the second layer leadership concern is what they need to address in order to avoid costly mistakes, as we now know it, such as Jacob Zuma.
They've been talking for many years about renewal, and those within the party itself have said, well, we haven't even seen what that renewal actually looks like. Where do they go from here?
I actually believe that if there was any period, any point where the ANC will actually activate, operationalize, implement the renewal project, it would be now. I think it becomes difficult for parties as big as the ANC to really go back to what the party really stands for, back to its principles and policies when they're in hegemony, right? They've been rejected by the voter. And I honestly believe that the ANC will actually, they'll galvanize a bit more, or certainly a lot of self-introspection. Why were they rejected? Yes, there's an MK party phenomenon. However, I actually think now would be the right period for them to actually renew the party. And then lastly, I think the election result.
Oh, Dr. Zwakale's gone. He just froze there, unfortunately, as we were wrapping up. We'll end it there. That was political analyst Dr. MK Zwakale, as we reflect on the ANC disciplinary committee expelling former President Jacob Zuma this week. You are watching The Week in Review. More after this. Stay with us. The Southern African Foundation for the Conservation of Coastal Birds says the work that rangers do in far-flung and often extremely isolated wilderness areas is vital to the survival of the African penguin. Along with BirdLife South Africa, SANCOB is taking government to court over feeding ground closures around penguin colonies. These offshore colonies are increasingly under threat and are vital to preventing these species in particular from edging closer to extinction. One of the most remote areas where a single ranger looks after an African penguin colony is on Robben Island off the coast of the mother city.
SANCOB's headquarters in Cape Town is the heartbeat to rescue, treat and ultimately release seabirds back into their natural environment. But wild animals do not flourish in easy-to-reach surroundings. A critical colony of the ever-dwindling number of African penguins reside on Robben Island. From land, the rocky outline can be seen in the distance. Here, Yandisa Kwekwe is the only SANCOB penguin and seabird ranger.
As a ranger, we do this by rescuing injured, sick, oiled or abandoned chicks and eggs, and then we send them over to SANCOB where they will be rehabilitated and then released back to the wild.
The battle for food is an immense challenge for African penguins. This is impacted, among others, by human activities. Last year, the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment announced the closure of fishing grounds around 6 breeding colonies. Welcomed at the time, SANCOB and BirdLife South Africa are now, however, approaching the courts. The organizations say the department did not take on board a critical recommendation.
At the moment, the closures are not really solving the problem of the competition between the penguins and the industry. So we're asking the court to assist us in that matter. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all of our problems, of course, but we think it's going to give the penguins a fighting chance to find enough food to survive going into the future.
The African penguin will be listed as a critically endangered species this year still, making the work of rangers in remote areas such as island colonies vital. Being away from loved ones is particularly hard, but Kwekwe's immense passion propels this marine scientist. As the only ranger for SANCOB that works closely with other research teams, she spends prolonged periods on the island, meticulously monitoring the precious penguin colony, which can be very tough.
Having to work under extreme weather conditions, and sometimes when I rescue birds on Robben Island and maybe on that day the weather is bad, it is difficult to send the birds over to Suncorp. So that is also one of the challenges that I face.
The forecast is not good for African penguins, and there are legitimate concerns that the species may become extinct within a decade. Without the work of rangers like Qoiqwe, the species would, however, long since have perished.
She may be stuck with situations where the weather is very bad and boats are not possible to transport the birds back and forth from the islands. And she would have the responsibility of stabilizing birds herself without any assistance, without any fancy equipment, just her and her expertise and her, of course, dedication and passion. And that's really what shines through.
And despite the odds, rangers like Qoiqwe battle on, believing every little bit of effort makes a great difference.
To all the rangers out there, I would like to encourage them to keep up with the good work for the benefit of the future generations.
Mariska Botha, SABC News, Cape Town.
You're watching the Week in Review right here in the SABC News Channel 404. Stay with us. We will continue at the top of the hour.
South Africa, gun violence is the leading cause of murder in South Africa.
You have about 9,000 guns that are annually reported to either have been stolen or missing.
We have a problem with the influx of guns into our society.
Another gruesome mass killing here.
It's the availability, it's the easy access to the weapons that's the issue.
Let's make it difficult also to obtain guns. It's so difficult to get a licensed firearm, but it's so easy to get illegal firearm.
We're going to get every gun, we're going to find every suspect.
Recent comments by DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille have set tongues wagging after she said that the ANC and DA are in a grand coalition and not a government of national unity. The South African Union of Students says the sooner a board is appointed for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme, the better. Zimbabwean activist and recipient of the Kofi Annan Next Gen Democracy Prize in 2023, Namatai Kwekweza, and 3 other activists will spend the weekend behind bars after Harare magistrate Ruth Moyo remanded them in custody. It has just gone 1 p.m. Central African time. You're watching the Week in Review, coming to you live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. I am Sebenzile Nkambule. Very good afternoon to you. Remember that you can join our discussions. Give us a ring. Our studio line is 011-714-0680, 0681 or 0682. Welcome. Let's start here in this hour. Recent comments by DA Federal Council Chairperson Helen Zille have set tongues wagging after she said that the ANC and the DA are in a grand coalition and not a government of national unity. The EFF has responded, saying it feels vindicated by Zille's remarks. The party is one of a few political organizations that are not part of the GNU. It said that Zille's comments confirmed its suspicions over GNU negotiations.
The formation of the Government of National Unity is under the spotlight yet again. This comes after DA Federal Chairperson Helen Zille, in a clip that has gone viral on social media, was heard describing the GNU as a grand coalition. In its reaction, the EFF said this has proved its characterization of the GNU to be correct. The fourth largest party in parliament opted to be part of the Progressive Caucus, refusing to get involved in an arrangement which included the DA and Freedom Front Plus. The EFF, in its statement, also said that Zille's comment confirmed what it always suspected, that the real negotiations for the establishment of the GNU took place between the DA and Cyril Ramaphosa and not the ANC NEC team led by Fikile Mbalula. The party further says it has been correct in asserting that the coalition of the DA and ANC was engineered by white capitalism through the manipulation of the rand. In a briefing at the ANC NEC currently taking place in Boksburg, the ANC Secretary General Fikile Mbalula said the party will not entertain Zile's remarks and will instead focus on ensuring that the GNU delivers on its promises.
She wanted the Grand Coalition. She came and the DA to the negotiations that we must not talk to the EFF, we must not talk to Zuma party, and all of these other people, PA and so on. We said no. We have signed a statement of intent with 10 political parties, including the DA. So what is she talking about?
The Minister of Sport, Art and Culture, Gayton McKenzie, who is also the president of the Patriotic Alliance, also weighed in.
I've heard yesterday comments about Helen Zille saying this thing, what. She must just chill. We're working very nicely together. There's no problem. We work very nicely with the DA, with the IFP. We are one. The GNU is going to last for 5 years. I took a personal bet with somebody, and now that person says, I want my money back because I can see it's going to last for 5 years. Yeah. It's nice being there. We respect each other. The enemies of the GNU, of course, they talk louder. Like, this is not going to last. How do you know if you're not inside? I'm there and I'm telling you it's going to last.
With the GNU less than 2 months old, some say it's already starting to show cracks. Political analyst Dr. Levi Ndo says Zile's remarks have a potential to create challenges within the GNU going forward.
This kind of remarks by Helen Zille has a potential to create unnecessary instability in the GNU and uncertainty. And I think it is important that the GNU should develop a proper communication framework.
Dr. Ndo argues that for the GNU to be successful, members of different parties must be willing to coexist and respect each other.
The GNU, in my view, has a potential to last if there is constant cooperation.
The fallout from Zile's remarks is likely to be significant. Amongst others, the MK party is likely to capitalize on them in its case against the SABC over the use of the term Government of National Unity. On greater concern is the message this sends to the other partners about their usefulness in South Africa's new administration. Ntlanhla Khatlane, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Some security officers in Limpopo have raised concerns about various challenges that they face on a daily basis. They are complaining about working conditions and violations of labor laws by some employers. They also complain about delays in salary payments by various private security companies.
Security officers play a crucial role in curbing crime and protecting people and properties. However, they say they are often looked down upon and exploited due to low entry qualifications for the job. The Sekhukhune Security Crisis and Demands Forum, which represents over 500 security officers in the Sekhukhune district, has raised several challenges faced by the security officers. The security guards work in various municipalities and departments. The forum says security companies are disregarding labor laws and exploiting their employees.
Rena jwalo ka ba leta dikgoro
Our challenge with the security companies is that they have bad treatment towards the security guards. They don't pay security officers on time and according to the minimum rates stipulated in the government gazette. They also don't pay for our provident fund, UIF and other benefits. Despite deducting from our members, sometimes they don't register them for anything. The officers just work without deductions. So as the Sekhukhune Security Crisis and Demand Forum, we are saying the municipality or government must employ security officers permanently to have all the benefits such as Provident Fund so that children can be able to go to school.
Crisis and Demands Forum.
Some security officers say the Department of Labor must take action against security companies that ignore the labor laws. They say some companies are taking advantage of vulnerable workers.
As female security officers, we are often mistreated and sometimes we are deliberately deployed far from home where we are unable to take care of our children. We are calling on our companies and managers to treat us well and with respect. Some of us as women, we are asked for sexual favors to get employment or better treatment at work. Most women are not entitled to maternity leave, which is against the labor laws.
Our job is dangerous and our lives are always at stake. Most of the time, when police officers are called to the crime scene, they usually find us after we have already arrested the criminals. We also protect people's lives against criminals and we are confronted by criminals on a daily basis. Most officers are not alive today. Their wives are widows and their children are fatherless because they died on duty. Even in 2018, one of us was shot. His wife lost a husband and his children are fatherless. She never got anything. He was buried but nothing happened. There was no provident fund and there were no other benefits.
Meanwhile, the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa says it's concerned that many privately owned security companies do not adhere to the collective agreement. NUMSA says the agreement was signed as part of the negotiations in the private security sector's bargaining council.
Part of what is entailed in the main collective agreement is that all employers, whether they sit in the bargaining council or not, all privately owned security services providers must provide workers with money, must allocate money for the medical insurance and also pay monies towards the provident or pension fund. Now, as a union, we've noted that there are many companies that do not adhere to this. There are many companies that, in spite of the fact that there is an agreement which is binding on all private security companies, there are those companies that are frankly committing fraud in that they will deduct that money, they will deduct money for the medical insurance, they will deduct money for the provident fund, but they will not actually pay that money over to the service providers so that workers are covered.
The Sekhukhune Security Crisis and Demands Forum says municipalities and government departments must insource all security officers to stop the exploitation of officers. It says it will hold a security indaba on the 9th of August at the Makhuditamara local municipality to outline the challenges in the security industry and outline the way forward. I'm Koke Jomodao, SABC News, Sekhukhune.
I'm speaking to James from Atlas Security.
From dispatching teams to patrolling residential areas, private security responds to all the residents, including those that are not clients. The rise in crime levels in the country has resulted in a flock of calls to these companies. One of the people to experience the slow response from police is Mpitizeli Diko. A private security company came to his rescue while trying to stop a man that was beating his partner.
I came across a man gruesomely beating up his girlfriend on the street. The police station is just a kilometer away, but I failed to get a police van to come. Upon calling the private security company, they responded quickly and assisted in taking the offender to the police.
With no form of financial support from the government, the private security companies have resorted to finding ways to reduce the number of non-paying clients.
The reason for this is because that we, as a business, we don't have any form of external budget from government, from anyone. We have to rely on our clients to sustain our operation. So we couldn't keep continuing to respond, and it was in the form of hundreds that we're responding to that are non-clients, and those are only the positive incidents. Client or non-client, we are in the fortunate position to be able to help people. So just because they're a non-client, it doesn't change the process at all. It's treated as a priority. Our response is dispatched to the scene.
While the police are criticized by the public for slow response, the two are finding ways to partner together.
The SAPS does not work alone when fighting crime. It is a joint partnership between all other government departments, all other law enforcement agencies, including private security. The SAPS has a signed memorandum of understanding and a partnership with Business Against Crime, which includes private security. Through our Eyes and Ears E2 project, the private security plays a major role in ensuring that jointly with the SAPS, we fight crime, we share resources together, and we conduct joint operations. But most importantly, private security is used as force multipliers on the ground to ensure that our eyes and ears continuously to help us to make our communities safe.
The public has been urged to take the police to task if they feel aggrieved by the service offered to them.
The police have a legal duty obligation to protect the public. So in instances where evidence is available to show that the police acted or failed to protect the public, then the public or any member of society can be able to sue the Department of Police for failure to protect the general public. This is so, and there are a lot of cases, decided cases in South Africa, which supports that.
Although working under difficult circumstances with limited resources, the security companies remain a beacon of hope for the residents that find themselves vulnerable to criminals. Nandi Paplaki, SABC News, Eastern Cape.
Thank you for staying with us. On Thursday, the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service, General Fani Masemola, held a press briefing to provide an update on SAPS's countrywide operations. And for more on this, we're joined by National Police spokesperson, Brigadier Atlenda Mate. Brigadier Mate, thank you very much for your time with us this afternoon. Let's perhaps start with some of the data focused on kidnappings. According to the 2022-23 annual crime stats, the total number of kidnappings in South Africa in that period was just over 15,000. Gauteng had the highest incidence with 7,818 cases reported, while KZN had just over 3,000 kidnappings during that period. The latest case being the rescue of a businessman who was kidnapped on the 5th of July from a mosque in Helderkrane in Roodepoort. The victim was found at a house in Lenasia on the 31st of last month, which led to the arrest of 8 suspects. In your view, what are your understanding about the trend we're seeing in kidnappings across the country?
Well, a very good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. As the SAPS, we do believe that we are implementing a very bold and decisive approach in preventing and combating all forms of crime across the country. With regards to kidnappings, the rise in kidnappings that you see are where kidnappings are part of another crime where common law crime is a motive. For instance, where a person is kidnapped for the purpose of hijacking, rape, and other crimes. But then we do see another form of kidnapping, which we do believe that we have been able to stabilize, where there are kidnappings, especially where ransom demands are being made. So we started picking up this trend as far back as 2017, and that is why in 2018, we established a national anti-kidnapping task team to deal decisively with this particular crime. So we've been able to form other task teams in provinces to ensure that we deal decisively with this particular crime, to ensure that we intercept, we dislodge and dismantle these syndicates that are behind these kidnappings, especially where businessmen and wealthy people are being targeted. So in the last 2 years, we've seen quite significant progress that has been made by our teams across the country. We are talking about more than 250 kidnappers that have been arrested. Just this week alone, we have arrested 8 kidnappers that were involved in the kidnapping of a businessman from Rhodoport. So we are seeing significant inroads that have been registered by our teams. We continue to ensure that our intelligence structures are on the ground to intercept these syndicates.
Is human trafficking, Brigadier, one of those crimes that are linked to the kidnappings here? And as the police, do you treat those particular incidents differently? So linked to the phenomena of human trafficking that we're also seeing within the country, and then of course that movement cross-border?
Look, crime is crime, and we treat it as such, whether it's human trafficking, whether it's theft, it's murder. We treat crime as crimes, and we treat criminals as such. Human trafficking and kidnappings are closely linked. For example, just this morning, we have rescued 90 Ethiopian nationals in Johannesburg during a tracing operation in which we were searching for a kidnapped victim who was kidnapped yesterday in Johannesburg. So during that tracing operation, we managed to identify a house where this victim was being kept. But upon intercepting this particular house and entering that premises, we then made the discovery of 90 Ethiopian nationals that were found to be without documentation, proper documentation. So we are investigating a case of human trafficking. We have referred the matter to the Hawks because it is their environment. They are focused on investigating such cases of human trafficking. So we are treating such cases the same way we are treating any other crime. We are taking it seriously because we found that these Ethiopian nationals were being kept under inhumane conditions, and it looks like they were being kept out of, they were actually kidnapped and brought in the country into the country without their consent. So we are investigating a case of human trafficking and how it is how they come about to enter the country.
And just on that particular matter, those 90 Ethiopians have since been arrested. The property where they were found, what do we know about that?
So the matter is under investigation. I do believe our teams are still combing the scene in Sunnydale Ridge in Johannesburg. Like I've indicated, this has been an operation that was conducted on Friday morning. We assembled the team as soon as a case was opened of kidnapping at the Sandringham police station in Johannesburg. We mobilized our specialized teams. We had our special task force leading operations. We had our detectives. We had our counter-intelligence team. So they've done quite great work because with the rescuing of that victim, the kidnapped victim, we managed to also intercept 90 Ethiopian nationals that were being kept at this particular house. And like I've indicated, they did not have the proper documentation telling us that they're illegal in the country, but they may have been trafficked to South Africa for various other reasons, which are the focus of our investigation.
Let's talk about gun violence now, Brigadier. It remains a huge issue in the country. On average, 23 people are said to be killed with guns each day. 106 firearms were seized in South Africa between the 22nd and the 28th of July. Why does this continue to be such a rife issue in society? And how are SAPs combating the prevalence of gun violence as well as the movement of illegal firearms in society?
Look, gun violence is of great concern to us as the management of the SAPS. And that is why on a daily basis, our operations are focused on detecting and removing these illegal firearms. Just in the past 2 years alone, we have seized 20,000 firearms. In the last 5 years, we have destroyed more than 263,000 firearms that were collected during policing operations that were either voluntarily handed over to the state. When you look at the crime stats, the murders that are happening, the crime that is happening, firearms are the most preferred weapon of use when serious and violent crime is committed. And that is why we are focused on detecting these particular firearms. When you look at the last 7 days, last week, we removed 106 firearms from all corners of this country. 40 of those firearms were coming from the province of KZN. And you would see, I mean, on a weekly basis, the KZN police are confronted with heavily armed criminals, dangerous criminals who have no regard for the rule of law and who are always ready to shoot at our police. So, and that is why we are implementing a very decisive and aggressive approach, because we do believe that we cannot negotiate with these particular criminals. South Africans and everyone in the country relies on the SAPS to keep them safe, and that is exactly what we're doing. We are mandated by Section 205 of the Constitution to ensure that we prevent, combat, and apprehend those that are behind all forms of criminality in the country. So we are looking at strategies to ensure that we tighten the security at all our borders where we think that these firearms are coming in from, because when you look at the firearms that are found at these particular scenes, they're all rifles, most of them AK-47s and so on. So we are looking at those strategies to ensure that together with other government departments, your Home Affairs, your SANDF, we tighten our security measures at our borders to ensure that we do not have illegal, dangerous, high-caliber weapons that are coming into the country. But like I've indicated, our operations are focused on removing these dangerous firearms on a daily basis. And
Brigadier, talking about KwaZulu-Natal, Brigadier, and the number of incidents, or all of which happening quite close to each other, of the police, in fact, in a gun exchange with alleged criminals and perpetrators there, about 6 or 7 in this week alone as well, who were killed in gunfire with the police as well. Many, of course, lauding the police for this action in KwaZulu, but of course there are those who are saying, are the police perhaps there being a bit heavy-handed on these cases? How do you reassure people who may have some concerns about what is seemingly heavy-handedness from the police? But of course, if the people are shooting at the police, we do expect that the police will respond appropriately.
Look, we'd like to assure South Africans that our members are highly skilled and trained in the use of firearms. Our police officers will always use force proportional to the threat. Like I've indicated, in all those incidents where in KZN, where suspects were shot and killed by police, their motive and their focus was to arrest these perpetrators. But when confronting these criminals, they are confronted with heavy gunfire, our police officers have no choice but to firstly defend communities and secondly defend themselves. When you look at the number of police officers that have died in the line of duty and off duty, it is quite a high number. Just on the 1st of September, we will be commemorating about 39 police officers who died in the line of duty in the last financial year. So it should give you an indication that our members are faced by brutal, ruthless gangs that have no regard for the rule of law. They don't respect police officers. And our focus and our commitment is that we will ensure the safety and security of South Africans, and we will go to lengths to do that. So we urge criminals to surrender when approached by police, because police, we have a mandate as outlined by Section 205. We have communities to protect. We have our police officers also to protect. And when you look, Sebenzile, at all of these criminals that we were intercepting in KZN, all of them are involved in serious and violent crime. You're talking about criminals that were involved in ATM bombings, in about murders, in armed robbery. So you're not talking about a criminal that is involved in shoplifting and theft and so on. It's serious and violent crime. So it does tell you that these criminals are heavily armed, they are dangerous. And like I've indicated, we are not going to back down as the police. We are going to ensure that we continue to keep our communities safe, and we can only do so by ensuring that we arrest these perpetrators or take them down.
Brigadier, I am pressed for time, but I do want to quickly squeeze in this question as well. The continuing issue of gender-based violence and femicide in this country, and as we've just entered Women's Month as well, I think it's appropriate that perhaps we spotlight that very issue. It continues to be a pandemic in this country, and often in cases where you have the victims of these crimes feeling though that they've been failed by the police, whether they have reported something, it just hasn't been acted on, and we continue to lose lives in a very brutal way. Just very briefly, going forward, what sort of strategies are in place from SAPS to deal with this?
Well, firstly and foremost, GBF remains a priority for the SAPS. At all our police stations, we've ensured that we've got GBV desks that are there to ensure that GBF victims are attended to. We also have private rooms that we ensure that all these victims are seen in a victim and are treated in a victim-sensitive manner. But what I can indicate in terms of GBVF, in the last financial year, 2,300 accused were convicted from life sentence to 5 to 10 years imprisonment, and more than 19,000 suspects were arrested for GBVF-related crimes. So we are making inroads, but we rely on the community because remember, GBVF quite often is a crime that is happening behind closed doors, in homes and so on, and most of the perpetrators are known to the victims. So we do urge our communities, don't turn a blind eye on GBVF, report it immediately to the SAPS so that jointly we can save more lives.
Let me thank you very much for your time with us this afternoon. National Police Spokesperson Brigadier Atlenda Mate joining us there on the line. You are watching The Week in Review. Stay with us, more on the other side of this. Thank you for staying with us. To this now, tensions have escalated and fears are mounting following the funeral of the Hamas senior leader Ismail Haniyeh. Iran has informed the United States of America through its friends in the region that it will launch a retaliatory attack after the assassination of Haniyeh at a hotel in Tehran. Hezbollah has also issued similar threats after one of its senior commanders was killed by the Israeli Defense Force. Haniyeh's funeral was held in Qatar, where he spent time after fleeing the Gaza Strip. The killing of the Hamas leader has sparked fears in the Middle East as Iran's threats to retaliate will affect peace and security in that region. Hamas has also called on those who support Palestine in its quest for freedom to join the International Day of Protests tomorrow. The protests aim to highlight the plight of Palestinians in Gaza and in those areas that are occupied by Israeli settlers. The International Court of Justice has recently ruled that those settlements are illegal and violate international law. Now, to help us unpack the implications of these latest developments and what it means for the region and global stability, we're joined this afternoon by Professor John Stremlau from the Department of International Relations at WITS. Professor Stremlau is an expert in international relations and conflict resolution and will be able to provide some insight into the complex web of alliances as well as interests at play here. Professor Stremlau, thank you very much for your time with us this afternoon. It's quite incredible, the events of the last couple of days. Let's perhaps begin with the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. We're yet to hear from Israel either denying that they're responsible for it or in fact claiming that they are responsible for this. The fact that he was also killed in Tehran has of course brought Iran a lot more stronger to the fold here, and we are already hearing from them that they will respond. Characterize the situation for us. Where are we currently with such high tensions at this point?
Well, Sibanzili, it's very difficult to know because a week has passed, and a week ago Saturday, it looked like a settlement was in the works to bring a ceasefire and to bring some alleviation to the human suffering in Gaza, which is the critical element in this equation. And then, boom, you had the Hezbollah attack on Israel and the killing of some school children. A bomb landed in a soccer field, and then retaliation by Israel against Sinkar, the Hezbollah militant, and then suddenly the next day, Ismail was killed, Haniyeh, and in Tehran, the Israelis have not claimed credit for it, although it's widely attributed to them. But it could be a random provocateur. On the other hand, Bibi Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, has a very real stake in preventing a two-state solution. He's always been opposed to a two-state solution back 30 years ago. I can remember he's really the impediment to any solution, in my view. And so he would have a vested interest in derailing what looked to be a very near ceasefire that could lead steps including alleviation and of the Palestinian crisis and a two-state solution.
What was the now late Ismail Haniyeh's role in those discussions, in those negotiations to try and, of course, achieve that ceasefire?
Well, that's the irony of all this, and the disturbing element in it is that Haniyeh was the most forthcoming and conceivably, to these terms are relative, of course, moderate. But he was open to negotiations. Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken said that a ceasefire was very, very close at hand. And Blinken has labeled the murder of Haniyeh as a despicable step, whoever is responsible for it. And therefore, it derailed the peace talks just as the most forthcoming and interested party in that representation of Hamas's interests in getting this ceasefire and the hostage and all of the other processes underway for an enduring settlement, and that was derailed.
Prof, we are battling a bit with your sound, but let's perhaps push on and hope it'll improve as we go. This obviously does send a very strong message. It says, we will find you wherever you are. Just given the very intricate way in which this particular assassination was carried out. Some reports saying that there was a bomb that was planted at this particular guest house about a month or two ago, and it was detonated remotely as soon as Haniyeh occupied that particular room. Let's perhaps also talk about the timing of the events of the last couple of days, that attack in Beirut, in Lebanon, this assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran. It also comes just a couple of days after Netanyahu's visit to the United States. What do you make of the timing of this of this particular assassination and that visit and that address to Congress a couple of days ago?
Well, it was terrible, and it risks an escalation of the conflict in the region, and so we're all very nervous about that. And it derailed assistance to the Palestinian people, which ought to be, and rightly so, the first. Because the overwhelming, and you know, South Africa got a ruling from the International Court of Justice recently that said that the occupation was unlawful because it is causing such devastation for civilians, populations there, in the name of tracking down some Hamas leaders. And yet Yahya Sinwar, the real brains behind the October 7th intrusion into Israel, remained unsolved, and he's not been caught. And so it's a cycle of violence that is a reminder of how fortunate South Africa was to reach an agreement, a peaceful agreement for moving forward to democracy. And there are not leaders on the other side on both sides of this dispute that could
Professor
do
Stremlau, we're going to have to park it there this afternoon, I'm afraid, only because there is a live briefing now that is taking place in Boksburg. The ANC's NEC currently briefing the media. That was Professor John Stremlau from Wits University. Let's take you live now to Boksburg, where the ANC NEC is taking place and are currently briefing the media.
I'm also the coordinator of the coalition task team of the ANC. Myself and Comrade Phoebe were also in the secretariat of the negotiation team of the ANC. Comrade Phoebe is also a member of the political education subcommittee. She is responsible for research in the ANC policy and research, and there is a very close relationship between policy and research, political education and communication that Comrade Zuko is dealing with now. He has already introduced what we looked at. So the first thing we needed to look at is, so yesterday you heard from the election team of the ANC about what they dealt with, but we were dealing with questions about how did we get here, and why did things happen the way they did, but also what we call here the moment. What does this represent? And is there a connection between what is happening in our country, or are there trends, elements of this elsewhere in the world and in our continent in particular? So the global and continental situation, and very specifically concluding with what is it that the ANC need to do. So we share in these two parts, Comrade Phoebe and I. We need to also acknowledge that in the panel we also had Comrade Joel Nechitenje from Mistra, who also made this presentation. So the first thing we would like to say is that the electoral outcomes of the 2024 elections are very significant for the ANC and for South Africa. And we characterized the outcomes as a strategic setback for the fundamental transformation of our country. What we call in our own parlance, in our own language, the National Democratic Revolution, which is essentially about the fundamental transformation of South Africa into a non-racial, non-sexist, truly democratic, united and prosperous nation. That is the ideal. That's the end game. Everything as the ANC and the Democrat progressive forces in our country are doing first and foremost is to achieve that vision. So we say that having looked at the election results, having looked also at some of the details, we will share with you what do they mean, but also what does this mean for both the country and the ANC. So we start there, that the ANC dropping from below 50%, performing as we know the numbers, you know them, represents a strategic setback. Now, which means that it has got really far-reaching consequences and implications for the way we have theorized the South African contradictions, the South African problem, the South African question. What are the nature of the problems we have in South Africa? What we also refer to as the contradictions, the nature of the contradictions. So we said this, when the ANC is not fully, because dropping below 50% in our constitutional democratic order means we are not fully in charge of all the levers of state power. So we have to work with the other parties, and it has already happened elsewhere in the municipalities. So we've got to work. We said that is a strategic setback. We then worked out what that really means is that we also have to go back to the strategy and tactics of the ANC. So if these results mean so much or have such huge implications for our vision, our strategy, our tactics, which has always been based on the assumptions that the ANC is in significant control. It's a majority party. We have a significant control over the levers of power, because without we say in our strategy and tactics that the reason we contest the elections and we ask for a mandate from the people of our country or in a municipality, we want them to give us the mandate so that we are we have full influence and control of all those levers, policy, so that we can implement an agenda. We don't contest elections simply because we want to just occupy those positions. We do so because we have this vision, we have this policy agenda, we have this social and economic transformation agenda. So we say these election outcomes has implications for that, and the NEC has just decided that we now have to go back to the strategy. That decision was already taken by the National Conference, that we must review the strategy and tactics of the ANC. But in the aftermath of an election, any party will have to look into. So how are we going to carry out this agenda, which we have not abandoned, which we will not abandon? How are we going to carry it out under conditions where sometimes we have to be into coalitions? That includes already what we are doing in municipalities. And in the national sense, we had to ask the question, so what does this mean immediately? So which takes me to the second decision of the NEC. So we had a special meeting, that assessed the election results. And that meeting said, the way forward, these implications mean we've got to still do the best to establish a government that has the potential and the ability to implement the agenda. It is not just about being in government again. And the NEC then concluded, that's the special NEC of the 6th of June after the election, said unanimously, we want to emphasize, it was a unanimous decision, and this NEC has reconfirmed that that was a unanimous decision, that we must establish a government of national unity. So we also gave a comprehensive report on the negotiations on the government of national unity as part of this assessment to understand where we are. And the Secretary General tabled a report to the NEC on that. But as part of assessing where we are, we also gave the NEC that full understanding that the key thing is that we have now carried out the implementation of your decision about the government of national unity. But the political ideological question arising is, so what is a government of national unity? What is its character? What is its potential? Can it really enable us to carry out this agenda?
Including its inherent limitations.
And the risks and contradictions that the ANC needs to be alive to in that. So the NEC, so out of this discussion, unanimously again, came to the conclusion that the government of national unity is the best option that we had to explore. You remember we explored four options: going into opposition, establishing a grand coalition, and by grand we mean, or it means, a coalition of 1 or 2 or 3 parties that are bigger. That's what a grand coalition means. So if any one of you hear someone confusing a government of national unity with a grand, you can't have a grand coalition of 10 parties. It's what we call a conceptual absurdity. It does not exist in concept. So so a government of national unity, which will come. So we did not. We ruled out going into opposition, and there was one good reason. The NEC reconfirmed that going into opposition, which during negotiations the ANC told some of the parties that, look, if you can agree to the fundamental principles and the minimum program, we can consider going into opposition. We are not desperate to be in power. We don't want to be in a government of national unity that will implement nothing, or in a coalition, whether it's a grand coalition where nothing will really work. So we ruled it out. But because being in opposition also means we are abandoning the masses. It means that if you are in opposition, you sit in opposition and raise the issues with the government of the day. We said there are many pressing issues for the people of our country that they need to be attended to. We ruled out the grand coalition, but we also looked at an option that exists, going into a minority government. Looked at the pros and cons of that, and we were able to say minority governments are inherently and incessantly unstable. So a minority government is permanently unstable. We said the advantage of any minority government is that you can just set it up and you decide a party, we will appoint everybody from our side. We are a minority government. So it's easy, you can have an agenda, but the advantage is very limited, is that you always need a lot of other people. And you negotiate from hand to mouth. And you don't know if tomorrow you will pass the budget. You don't know if there is a motion of no confidence, you'll get all support. That's the inherent nature of the weakness. We said we need policy certainty, we need stability. We will not go for that. And then we ultimately went, the NEC confirmed in its perspective that the government of national unity, with all its contradictions and risks, is still the best option that we went to. So the last area I want to focus at is we did an analysis, what we call the balance of forces. So the balance of forces essentially is to look at in the nature of the battle. Election campaigns in modern society, election campaigns are big political battles by other means, by peaceful means. It's warfare by peaceful means. It's a battle whichever. That's why political parties use the language of war. But it's in a democratic terrain. The instruments we use is not weapons of bloodletting. But in any case, it is a battle. So when we did the analysis of the balance of forces, so we say, how did this battle unfold? Who was on which side? So we analyzed, and what did the results tell us? We said, first in South Africa, we have what we call, we have the forces that have always been opposed to fundamental change. Before 1994 and after 1994, the forces that are opposed to the fundamental transformation of every aspect of society, what we call in that vision, in the National Democratic. So we characterized those. Essentially, right-wing forces, some of them in different ways, liberal and illiberal, very conservative elements in there, but we characterize them as the principal opponents of our vision for a fundamental transformation of South Africa. Opponents, not enemies. We are in a democracy. So they are our principal opponents. And then we say there are others who were also in the battle. So there is the ANC-led progressive, what we call so it's the ANC-led alliance and the democratic movement, whose vision and program is what we have articulated. So they stand. So on the one hand, you have this first category, and then you have this second category. But we then said, over time in the last 30 years, there's also been a development in our country where there are opposition parties. There are parties that have emerged in municipal elections, in national elections that have been opposed to the ANC in varying degrees, opposed to this vision, distinct from those who have described as the principal opposition to our National Democratic Republic. We have characterized them. And we say one of the very important reasons that we have suffered this strategic setback, we are saying that in the category, these elections don't represent any growth on the right wing. So the right wing in South Africa has remained more or less the same size. We have said the right wing forces, and I don't have to mention. We're not mentioning the parties, but you make sense of this. There are parties that represent this, opposed to transformation, whether it's BEE or specific manifestations of that. But there's been a development where the other parties have, so there are those that come from the traditions of the liberation movements. We have had differences, but they've been in the liberation movement fold. But they are not in the alliance. They are not in the ANC-led alliance, but they are part of the liberation movement family. But they've also been breakaway parties, the parties that broke away from the ANC. And we have looked at what. So if the right-wing opposition has not grown in the last 30 years, their size is more or less. So they would be between 20 and 25%. And in some elections, if they would have gone further, it would be, if you combine them, and that's what in this election was represented by the moonshot-packed parties. If you club them together, they would not be more than 28% in that. And then the big difference now is there's been this growth of breakaway parties. Breaking away from who? largely from the ANC. So one of the reasons we say has impacted on the ANC's electoral performance is the breakaway parties. Breakaway, and again, all the breakaway parties, formed at different points. And that has had an impact on, because in what we call the motive forces, those social classes and strata that constitute from who the ANC has really mobilized for change, get affected by the breakaway parties. Essentially, what we call in strategy and tactics is black people in general and the Africans in particular. But in class terms, it means principally the working class and the rural poor, the black middle strata and black entrepreneurs. That's what we call the motive forces, but also democratic-minded white South Africans are part of this force. The motive forces are the forces for change, those that we rely on for the fundamental transformation of our country, because they benefit from this fundamental transformation. So internally, in the in the democratic movement, we have had what we call political fragmentation of the motive forces. So the breakaway parties have an impact. They eat from, they fish in the same pond. They have that impact. So the ANC is one important thing, and in this election in particular, there's one. The others have been static, no growth. Others have reached a ceiling, but there's a new one that was formed in the run-up to this election that is particularly responsible for the eroding decisively in this election. But we ask the question, but why would the motive forces, what's happening with these forces? Why would they, so what's happening with the motive forces? Why would they be fragmented? Which brings me to my last question that makes a transition to we say that there are many reasons, but the fundamental reason is that the forces for change, the social base, the support base of the ANC has been affected by a number of factors. One is that the principal one is that the performance of the economy have had major impact on the demoralization and fragmentation of those who have always in every election stood by the ANC, because the ANC is an organization that is championing the transformation of our country. So this question on the impact on the economy we essentially come to the conclusion that poor performance of the economy, on the one hand, inability of our economy to deliver large number of jobs, and on the other hand, that the structure of the economy, the South African economy is principally still structured in a way that benefits the minority. So the persistent structure of our economy that is largely apartheid colonial structure is the reason that has impacted also on the mood of the motive forces. That's a very important, that tackling the transformation of the economy of our country and getting the economy to really lift up and perform will be one major thing that the ANC would like to do using even the government of national unity. That's why you see in the economy is a big issue. In fact, in our manifesto is the number one issue. The second thing is the state of the ANC itself. So the state of the, we say one of the major reasons we are where we are is we have disappointed the forces, the support base that believe in us. Also because there's been ideological and organizational problems, that what we call degeneration. The organization is not in the ideal state that and we have discussed this for many reasons, for many years. What we call the need for renewal means the ANC has severely eroded its ethical, its intellectual, its ideological, and its organizational principles, and that we come out of this acknowledging. And that's why the team yesterday from elections was also saying that renewal is a do or die issue now. We have to renew or we will perish. And one of the conclusions of this is that it's the many different resolutions we have taken on renewal are now going to be implemented. And the last area which is important, it's about it's how these breakaway parties have impacted on the ANC. And we have analyzed the breakaway parties. We have analyzed each one of them about the tendency, the political tendency. That's what Comrade Zuko, what does each one of them represent as a political tendency? And came to the conclusion that there is a lot of political, ideological, and organizational work that the ANC is going to do to defend what is principled, transformative, and emancipatory politics. So as we renew the ANC, we are going to avoid a tendency where the ANC is transformed into tendencies that each of these parties represent. And in great detail, we will, in our perspective, we explain what does each of the breakaway parties represent as a tendency. And what's happening in society? There are crises and tendencies that have a huge impact on the progressive transformation of our country. Some of them are global, or they have global manifestations, but they are now hitting our democracy. Our democracy itself has specific element of a crisis that Comrade Phoebe will talk about, but there are multiple crises. So we are not going to respond to the breakaway groups from the ANC in an unprincipled way, simply because it's election time, simply because we are not having the numbers, we are going to respond. We say we are going to respond in a principled way. And even as we enter into various coalitions, we will still pursue that consistent, principled, transformative politics, that the ANC wants to remain the center of transformative politics in our country, emancipatory, a kind of politics that's about changing the lives of people, not politics that's because it's time for coalitions. But what does that mean? It does not mean we can't work with other parties. It doesn't mean we can't work with parties on the right. It doesn't mean we can't work with any of the parties we find ourselves with, even those that may have broken away from the ANC. It doesn't mean we can't work with them. And it is for that reason that at the GNU, the start of the GNU negotiations, the ANC invited all these parties. So I would like to leave it here that even if we have major ideological and political challenges we have identified with the parties on the right and with the parties that broke away from us, given each moment and given the needs of our country and given the interests of our country, given the interests of a locality, given the interest of a municipality or a province, we will seek to work with even those with whom we disagree if it will help advance the project of improve the quality of life in a community, advance the project of transformation of the country. But these crises are many and they can be overweighing on us. They need a very, very strong ANC. And what are these crises? I would like to hand over to Comrade Phoebe. And how do they relate with the crisis elsewhere in the continent and in the world?
We're under pressure on time. We're carrying slides, so you need. No, so you can hit it from there.
Okay, can I do it from here?
I will move.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Phoebe Potgieter. So just to say, I'm not going to be as detailed, but just to say that that part of the analysis of the National Executive Committee also look at what are the multiple crises that we face as a country. The first one is the fact, and I think that Makura referred to it, that the 40% on the one hand, but also the fact that voter turnout was 58%. Even in provinces where the ANC won, like Limpopo and Eastern Cape, Northwest, voter turnout was 41%. So a large portion of the population didn't vote, in addition to those that are not that are not registered. So we do face a crisis of democratic participation if you have such low levels of registration as well as turnout. Linked to some of the research that's been done by, say, Afrobarometer, trust in institutions like Parliament, trust in the police services, trust in national government or local government. So part of what we need to look at is how do we bring in more people to feel that democracy work for them. So that's the first issue, that part of the multiple crises that we face. The second one is the fact that it's the ANC that has lost the confidence of the motor forces, what we call the motor forces, working people, unemployed people, young people. The only stars that that's been consistent are women, because women, 58% of women who were registered voted. So 42%, only 42% of men participated in the election of registered voters, but also 55% of women are registered. So they've been quite a consistent constituency in terms of supporting our democracy. And when we therefore talk about how do we move forward, we must address the question and the plight of women. How do we take forward a non-sexist South Africa? And some of these decisions of the NEC relate to that. So that's the second issue. The third one is that there's a crisis with regards to what we call the national question. Because if you look at how people voted still on the basis of racial identity, and even more so within the black community, if you look at some parties in the country, in the coloured community, KwaZulu-Natal, etc. So the dream of a non-racial South Africa where people vote on the basis of policies and on the basis of what it means for the country, clearly we face a challenge there. But it didn't also just express itself in the elections. We've seen, these intermittent instances of racism that we can't quite understand. How young people would auction each other off as slaves, or, urinate on a domestic worker's food. Those kind of incidents that shock all of us. And one of the things that, if one look at the statement of GNU's statement of intent, amongst the minimum program is that we need to have a sustained program against racism, homophobia and sexism, because we can't just be shocked when these incidents happen without looking at what are the underlying causes of misogyny in our society, what are the underlying cause of racism in our society. So that's the third crisis that we face, a crisis of the national question. The fourth one is David has talked about that, the breakaway parties from the ANC. We need to deal with factionalism in our ranks that then give rise to breakaway parties and the kind of tendencies that we've seen. But in addition to that, we also face a crisis of political fragmentation. Something like, I think, 10 of the 18 parties, in fact, 90% of the seats in Parliament are 5 parties. And then you have about 10, 12 parties who have 1 seat and 2 seats, etc. A city like eThekwini have 18 parties that are represented there. Now, some people say that that's good for democracy to have that kind of fragmentation, but it's not. We argue it's not. That in fact, what it does is not allow for you see the kind of instability that you see in Joburg now, often in Nelson Mandela, etc., etc. So we think that the issue of political fragmentation is something that we need to deal with, and it's a crisis. And then, of course, fundamentally, and Makura spoke about it, is the crisis of transformation. Now, the ANC has been in power for the last 30 years. Amongst the advances that we've made was on what you call the social wage. So, the recent statistic just this last week by Stats South Africa, amongst women, life expectancy is now 70. We haven't seen that in, I think, the history of our country. I mean, it used to be white people that have reached 70 and above. 1996, our life expectancy was 56 years. We've been able to raise, we live longer. In addition to that, we've also addressed challenges of infant mortality and child mortality, as well as maternal mortality. So in terms of the social wage, health, the basic services, water, etc., there's a general acceptance that those are things that the state must deliver. And part of the disappointment of the electorate in the ANC is the service delivery challenges that we've seen, where you have taps and there's no water, or the load shedding crisis, or people go to clinics and it's not open over the weekend or in the evening. And those are all part of the achievements of democracy, because people in a normal country, those are rights. Those are things that government must deliver. But, and this is where the issue that Makura also earlier addressed is the question about economic transformation. We have not moved as fast as we should over the last 30 years, and that relates to the pace of our land reform. It relates to the fact that we, yes, have very robust competition policy, but we still have large-scale monopolies in virtually every single sector of our economy, making a difference for new entrants. That's an issue that the NEC Lekgotla that starts tomorrow will discuss in quite a bit of details, and in fact most of our discussion will be about it. But that's what we believe is the major preoccupation of the Government of National Unity over the coming time that we need to resolve and make significant progress in terms of that. Over the last, since the financial crisis, I think 2008, 2009, we've seen pedestrian growth. We haven't, I can't remember at a point when we were over 2%. We had periods of zero growth. We've got a crisis of unemployment, 43%. If you look at the narrow definition, the president in the meeting made the example, and he said that, during the door-to-door, and the ANC is the one movement that have been across in every single ward in the country, knocking on doors and talking to people. And we could see what exactly the conditions are that made people to stay away. But in addition to that also, and this is what the president says, that we used to have rallies and community meetings at 11 o'clock and they were packed. People are not at work. And that during the week. And that is, it's an indication that there's something fundamentally wrong. And part of what we need to do is to look at how do we fundamentally address that. We've focused on public employment and social employment, and yes, in our the opening of Parliament address, that will still be a priority, but we need to look at how do we grow the economy, what do we do about mineral beneficiation, how do we bring people more into the agriculture and agro-processing, what do we do about, in the ICT sector, in logistics, how do we open up economic opportunities for everybody. So I've gone a little bit into that, but for us that is the fundamental challenge that of the moment that we need to resolve as a country. And this is also what we believe the national dialogue should be about how do we make sure that the economy grow, that we create jobs, but also have economic inclusion. Now, some of the national trends that we see are also global trends and African trends. The question about the fact that South Africa has a large youth population, that's an African demographic trend. By 2015, I think a quarter of everybody under the age of 18 will be African. If one look at the expectation where the mega cities in the world will be by over the next 20 years, it will be in Africa. If one look at arable land, etc., and in addition to that, what we have done as a continent over the last 20 years, we transformed the OAU into the AU. We adopted Agenda 2063. We looked at the matter of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And all of those are part of what we as South Africa need to position ourselves. I was just saying to somebody yesterday that there was an interesting article in one of the higher education publications that said that looks at railways in Africa, because you can't, with a continent as huge as ours, where you want to encourage trade between South Africa and the DRC or between South Africa and Namibia, not move your things in rail. So we must invest in that. And this article is about which universities have rail engineering faculties. There's one that started, I think, at University of Pretoria. Nigeria is starting one. Egypt has one. There's a Kenyan university that's also looking at it. And as South Africans, we need to be part of those developments in the continent, because it's a huge opportunity, because the rest of the world is aging. We are growing younger, and also a growing population. So those are some of the global trends. I'm not going to go into details about it, but just to say that in conclusion, the NEC therefore concluded that there are, there's a whole range of different issues that we have to pay attention to, but it can be summarized into 3 priorities. The first one is that we need to improve governance, and we need to take responsibility for the capacity of the state. How do we fix local government? How do we ensure that you build a professional public service that we've been talking about for the last while? There are proposals on the agenda. We need to move towards making sure that they implement it. There are certain approaches towards, how do you ensure that basic services that the state is more responsive in terms of basic services, that if there's a problem of water, or if Joburg is facing the crisis that Johannesburg face now, it is something that government at a national level need to be concerned with. Just recently, it was reported that the Eastern Cape is in an economic recession. We should be concerned about that as a country. And as national government, what do we do about pulling out the Eastern Cape from that economic recession as part of a national strategy? So as I said, the Lekgotla will look at all of those issues. So the first one is to look at the question about how do we improve governance and do better than what we've done. Secondly is to look at the question about the economy. And it has to be about the economy, because at the end of the day, it's about jobs, it's about economic inclusion, it's about, thousands of young people with bright business ideas that don't have the opportunities or the markets or the access or the capital, and how do we then ensure that those opportunities happen? So about the economy, but also looking at economic transformation. He's been raising it. How do we raise capital for industrialization, for infrastructure development, etc.? So the economy is a second priority. And then the third one, of course, is about the ANC renewal. Because we accept, as a National Executive Committee, that we've got to adapt or perish. Adapt in the sense that it's not just simply about repeating about all of the things that we've said, but in a genuine way look at how do you modernize an organization that's 112 years old, but that exists in today's movement, in a country that has changed? How do we appeal to young people? How do we appeal to workers? How do we appeal to rural people? How do you appeal to women? How do you appeal to the LGBTQI, etc., etc.? So that's part of what we're looking at. Let me conclude by saying that understandably so there's a lot of skepticism from yourself, but also from our population. And for the ANC and for the National Executive Committee, we're not asking you to take us at our word, or for the population to simply say that you've said nice things. But at the end of the day, we will have to be judged by what we do in all 3 of these areas. And this is why the National Executive Committee has also emphasized, one, monitoring and evaluation, but also secondly, consequence management. The President spoke at length about it, that we've got performance agreements with ministers, but what happens if you don't perform? There has to be consequence management. The ANC decide on a particular policy, or the government decide on a particular policy. or program, and there's no consequences, but also intolerance towards incompetence and intolerance towards corruption. And at the end of the day, the eating of the pudding will be in the eating. Is that? Yes. That's the expression. Yeah. So I think that is what our National Executive Committee reflected on. I think it was a really robust, brutally honest discussion, but at the same time also that as a generation, and many of us spent our youth fighting against apartheid, we can't let our movement perish in our hands, because we believe that if the ANC perish, then the ideal of a non-racial, united, democratic, non-sexist South Africa will also be much, much more difficult to achieve, not just in South Africa, but I think also for the African continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, comrades. I did say that it would be quite an extensive one because it's politics and how the ANC politically understands the situation that it is in.